poem is a ballad. A ballad is a poem or song telling a story in short stanzas. Ballad is such kind of poem which tells a story, and traditional ballads were songs that did not have authorship but was transferred from one generation to another orally. Every culture has its own ballads. And this poem is titled A Legend of Northland. What do you mean by a legend? A legend is a traditional story, sometimes popularly regarded as historical but not authenticated. That means it is again a story that has been passed on from generation to generation in a society or culture, and it's popularly considered as historical. That it's something that happened long ago, but not authenticated, but not sure whether it has really happened. It is a kind of historical story which is not authenticated by historians. So every culture or every society has their own legends. For example, Keralites have a legend of Mahabali, or King Mahabali, who visits them every year during Onam. They consider Mahabali to be a king who lived long ago, but again we do not know whether that king had really lived. So that is a legend, a traditional story that is passed on from generation to generation, considered to be historical but not for sure. Every culture has got its own legends. So the poem begins like this. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. So the poet begins by describing Northland. Northland is the place in North Pole, where the hours of the day are few. As you know, North Pole is in a position where sunlight is very less. So the hours of the day are very few and the nights are so long in winter. So the sun sets very early and rises only very late. So the nights are very long and they cannot sleep them through. So they here means the people of Northland. They cannot sleep them through. Even if they sleep for many hours, when they get up, it will be night again. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. So when they harness means fasten an animal to a cart, connect an animal to a cart or a plow. That is the meaning of the word harness. The swift reindeer, as you know, reindeers are used in North Pole to transfer people or things. And this picture of the Christmas father using a sledge and a reindeer is very famous. So I have this picture for you here. So this is a sledge, a vehicle used in the North Pole to transfer people and things. So when the people, they connect the swift reindeer to the sledges, and when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in the funny furry clothes. So since it is very cold, it is winter, they all have winter clothes on them, warm clothes on them, and the poet says the children look like bears' cubs, the kids of a bear, because of the funny furry clothes. In this line you have a simile. Simile is a figure of speech. Simile is a figure of speech which compares two things. Here children is compared with bears, cubs, using the word like. So we have a simile here. Moving on, they tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. So the poet says that when they harness the sledge, they tell them a curious story. They here means the parents or the elders tell the children a curious story, a strange story, and the poet says, I don't believe it is true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. But if I tell that story to you, there is a lesson that you can learn from that story. So the story begins here. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching just as he did, you know. So the story is about Saint Peter. Saint Peter is one of the disciples of Jesus Christ. When the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it, meaning when he lived on earth and walked on it preaching. So Saint Peter was a disciple of Jesus who preached the good news of Jesus. And the poetess says, just as he did, you know. He came to a door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the earth. So he was traveling around the earth preaching the good news of Jesus, and he came to the door of a cottage where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Hearth here means fireplace for doing cooking. So he came to a cottage where a woman was making cakes, was baking cakes. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So Saint Peter had not eaten anything the entire day. He was fasting, for the day was almost done. That means it was almost night, and he had not eaten anything. He asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. He asked for a single cake from her store of cakes. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. So what did she do? She was making cake. So she started making a very little cake and she put it for baking. And when she looked at that, when the cake was baking, and when she looked at that, she felt that it was too large to give away. It was a very big cake. Therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one. But it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. So she was a selfish woman. What did she do? She made another cake which was smaller than the first cake she made for Saint Peter. But when she turned it over on the hearth, she felt that this cake was as large as the first one had done. It was as large as the first cake she cooked. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with it. She made 2 cakes and felt that both the cakes were very large. And since she was a very selfish, miserly woman, what did she do? She took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat. So the poet says rolled and rolled. So the emphasis is here that she baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. She was so greedy that she couldn't even part with that cake she made, which was so thin like a wafer. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. So the woman says that when she eats the cakes seem very small. My cakes that seem too small when I eat of myself are yet too large to give away. But when I give it to someone, she feels that they are very big to be given again. This kind of attitude sometimes happen to us also. When we do or have things for ourselves, we think that they are very small, but when we are asked to give that to someone else, we think that it's too large to be given away. So she put them on this shelf. She did not give anything to then good St. Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. So the so Saint Peter, he became very angry. He was so hungry and he was very tired, but this woman was not giving him anything to eat. So this behavior of the woman provoked the saint. Provoke means cause to get angry, make somebody angry. So this woman provoked Saint Peter because she was so greedy and was not giving anything for him to eat. And he said, you are too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. So Saint Peter said that she was so selfish. She did not deserve to live in a human form, because God has given her a lot of resources like food, shelter and fire to keep her warm in this winter season. But she was too selfish and she was not sharing it with anyone. So she did not deserve to live like a human being. So what did Saint Peter say? Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. So Saint Peter cursed the woman and said that she would live like a bird with scanty food, very little food, by boring and boring and boring all day the hard dry wood. Boring means making a hole with a tool or by digging. So you have seen woodpeckers boring the wood to make a house in the trees. So Saint Peter cursed the woman. He said that she will be a bird who shall live her life boring all day in the hard dry wood and with scanty food, little food. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. And what happened? As soon as Saint Peter cursed the woman, she went up through the chimney, never speaking a word. She did not even get a time to tell something. Before that, she was transformed into a woodpecker, and out of the chimney she flew to the skies.